You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Now that's when we would hear the voice.
The voice? Well, we shouldn't hear the voice, actually. Let's hear it now, because this is intriguing.
この人を助けてお願い
生きてることを実感させてくれ。お父さんとお母さんに会えたの。僕はどれほど幸せに思ってるか知りません。
I should say that this tape is completely undoctored. There's no edit on it whatsoever.
We should also warn our viewers of a nervous disposition that the things on this tape that they might find a little bit distressing.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
We're talking about the Texas chainsaws that nobody talks about, because that's just what we do here. All right, join the sleaze.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for, we are in our 5th year of bonus episodes. So there's something like 100 plus bonus episodes. So if you haven't made the jump yet, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we did have a few people make the jump this week, so we'll give them their shout outs here. We had Scott Everett, Yashar GM, Alex Mendez, Alex Miller, Ethan Frank, Patrick Clausen, Bjorn Unar, who signed up at the annual tier, which is something that people can do. I'm sure people know by now, but nice. Thanks to Bjorn. We also had Jordan Winnie, who signed up at the $10 a month tier, is going to be joining us for the virtual screenings we do once a month for the $10 patrons. We're going to try and have fun this month because
we've been going samurai mode.
Yeah, we've been watching some kind of crappy ones kind of by accident. We've been doing some crappy slashers, so I think we're going to try and pick something good this week. So thanks to Jordan for joining us. We also had John Connell sign up, as well as Joshua McGonigal, Alan Welsh, and last but not least, a good boy. And the picture is of a cat. So that is a good boy right there. Thanks so much to you folks. Hope you guys are enjoying those bonus episodes. We appreciate the support. That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I know that you are, I see the stats. Scroll down to the very bottom right now and give us a good old rating and review down there. Helps us climb the ranks at iTunes and find new listeners. And the last plug, merch. If you like the poster art that local, based out of Toronto, horror artist Trevor Henderson did for the show, you can get that basically put on anything you can think of. A shirt, a hoodie, notebook, pillow, just a straight up poster. We've had people buy, I think someone bought a pen. You know, you can, I don't even know
Nice.
all the things that you can buy. If you're interested, that link is in the description, as well as at sleazoidspodcast.com. That's the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks, the main feed listeners, would have heard from us, and we would have had special guest Michael Chow on, who gave us an insane double feature of the king of comedy, Martin Scorsese, and Perfect Blue, Satoshi Kon. We talked about the blurring of fantasy and reality, and media and consumer, and done in two
fans.
very different eras and two very different styles, and obsessive fans. Which, once again, if anyone out there has cardboard cutouts of Jamie and I and is talking to us like that, let us know. You've earned a prize. You will get a slot on the show.
Yeah, I was gonna say, come on.
Come join us. Live the dream. So that episode was back on the main feed 2 weeks ago. I'm assuming most of you have listened to it, but if not, what are you doing? Go check it out. And then last week, over on the bonus feed, over on the Patreon, we did small-time regional crimes gone wrong, which as a result, we had to talk the Coen brothers. So we talked about Blood Simple, their debut film from 1984, I believe. And we paired it with a very underseen Canadian gem, straight out of Ontario, where Jamie and I are from. One of the best, most underrated Canadian crime films, made in 1975, even sort of predates a lot of the films that you might compare it to, called Sudden Fury. And it is about a guy who is a shitty real estate agent who basically tries to kill his wife for by leaving her for dead in a car accident for her money, and spends the entire rest of the movie logistically trying to get away from that crime. And it is not easy to do. So if you want to hear us talk about the Coen brothers and the Canadian version of the Coen brothers that existed before they were even filmmakers, that was on patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's bonus episode. But moving on to this week, we have a very special returning guest, 3-time guest, actually, making her third appearance on the pod. And that guest is a media archivist and a co-host of a podcast that talks about Channel Awesome called Get Cynical, Esther Rosenfield. Esther, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Am I the first 3-time guest, by the way?
Not the first 3-time guest, but you join a very exclusive club.
Yes.
I think there's maybe 3 or 4 of you.
Cool. All right, I'll take it. I mean, it's been 2 years since I was on last, and probably 2 years before that I did the first one.
I know it's been a little while. I realized going back and trying to remember what exactly the last episode we did together was, that we last recorded at the very first week of the pandemic. Which was a surreal experience. That podcast gives you the ability to time travel back to how we were thinking and feeling back in those moments. So it was definitely wild. But I also think that, Esther's been on obviously a couple times, and somehow Esther has combined her 2 fields of expertise and interests in the world. And I wasn't exactly sure what the pairing was when I first looked at it, and then I watched it and I was like, this is the most Esther double feature anyone could have possibly come up with. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But Esther, what 2 films have you brought with you this week, and why do they pair together?
All right. The first film is Nobuhiko Obayashi's film The Discarnates, also known as Summer Among the Zombies sometimes, but I think The Discarnates is a more suitable title for what the movie actually is.
Yes.
And the second film is, I actually don't remember the director off the top of my head, but it is Ghostwatch.
Leslie Manning, I believe.
Leslie Manning's British 90s TV special. And, I think in my previous double features, they've been a little more galaxy-brained and a little more tenuous in the connections between them.
Yes, we did what, a Eraserhead and House, and was the first time you came on in the first year, and then last time around that was I was just listening.
It was Prince of Darkness and the Blair Witch Project, which thank you for letting me get away with that, by the way.
No, that was a great episode. That was fun.
Yeah.
This one is much simpler. These are just 2 movies about ghosts. They're ghost stories. And this being the spookiest time of the year, of course, you had to have me on.
Right.
Early February, as we all know, is the time when the ghosts and the goblins come out to play.
That's right. No, well, this was perfect, because I was like, the first time Esther came on, she brought on Obayashi. The second time Esther came on, she brought on found footage, and I was like, okay, so here we are. Here's the intersection of these 2 interests is in this exact double feature, because the Discarnates is seems kind of like an underseen Obayashi, and definitely a very restrained Obayashi for anyone who is maybe only familiar from some of the titles that are more mainstream from him. And Ghostwatch, while not quite, I would say, necessarily a found footage film, is definitely, a film that inspired a lot of filmmakers who would go on to, maybe popularize that specific genre. And it is incredible piece of, sort of aesthetic imitation. The fact that basically operates like a live TV special, but you are watching a fictional horror film at the same time. Very crazy vibes.
And it did trick people, which I can't wait to get into. So.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's going to be crazy. The fact that, there were like something like 1 million call-ins while that was airing on TV because everyone was convinced they were like Blair Witch Project, that they were watching it for real. But imagine like 11 million people were watching that live on Halloween night. Like, it's insane just to think about.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely two very different stylistic approaches to ghost stories, and I'm definitely excited to get into these. So let's start off here with the Discarnates. All right, we are talking The Discarnates, the 1988 Japanese horror quasi-drama film directed by one Nobuhiko Obayashi, who we've talked about only once previously on this show, which is kind of a travesty, actually, now that I think about it. And the one time it was with Esther, who brought on his most sort of acclaimed and most popular sort of like film that made it overseas, a film called House, that a lot of our listeners will be familiar with, both because it's relatively popular, but also obviously we've talked about it on the show as well. And I went back to that episode because I wanted to be like, what were we talking about when we were doing that episode? Because stylistically, it's such a different film. And Obayashi, obviously very well known, and we talked about it on that episode that he was an experimental short film and avant-garde filmmaker who turned very briefly, for budgetary reasons, into a very stylish commercial advertisement director, supposedly making around 3,000 or so in his career, and really developing a very pop visual style of doing that, being able to experiment with the visual trickery of commercials. And I think on that episode we even played that Mandem deodorant commercial that he shot with Charles Bronson.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's so good.
And yeah, a lot of his counterparts kind of looked down on him for doing commercials, but again, he was able to get budgets and he was able to practice his visuals and really make them pop in short bursts of time. And House, we talked about it when we did that episode, was somehow Japan's response to Jaws. They were like, we wanted a summary genre hit. And that was awesome. What kind of came out of that. A movie, again, with cars filled with bananas and a piano eating girls and, watermelon turned floating cannibal head, all kinds of dream logic craziness. That disobeyed a lot of the typical visual rules of coherency in the name of a very kind of joyful expression. I remember, Esther, when you were on that, you made a big point to talk about the passion that Obayashi seems to just have for movie making. That it felt like that. If that was going to be his debut film, he was like, I need every avant-garde technique, every camera trick, every manipulation of the frame that I could possibly fit into it. It's going to be in there. And what's so interesting, sort of moving on, I guess, to the Discarnates here, which came out, House was in 1977 and obviously, very well known for, and I think as a result, kind of people, mistakenly kind of assume that his entire filmography is going to be wacky. That's kind of the thing that people talk about, even though it's not necessarily, even if you watch some of his experimental short films, that's not exactly the tone. So as someone who has watched a lot of Obayashi in comparison to Jamie and I, maybe you can walk us through Obayashi's development and shift between 1977 and 1988 to where we got to here with the Discarnates.
Yeah, Obayashi's a guy who has a very sincere love of cinema. And we talked about, years ago when we did that episode, like you say, how that manifests in House is in this sort of rush to excitedly use as many techniques as possible and use the camera in as many different ways as possible. And I the way I sort of think of it is like, once he got that out of his system, he's like, okay, now I'm going to keep making movies, but I'm going to deploy those ideas in more specific ways. Now that I kind of have a sense of what I'm capable of doing and what a camera is capable of doing.
Right.
I can make any kind of movie I want, and he did. He made, he was a director of like idol movies in that kind of post-House period with just actresses and singers, and making movies like Lonely Heart, and I'm struggling to come up with another name because a lot of those haven't been translated, so I haven't seen them. But his 80s period is really interesting because he kind of returns to genre fare, but in an often more grounded way. He has films like this, The Discarnates. He has The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. And then in some cases, just straightforward dramas like The Deserted City, which is another one of my favorite films of his, which is just, there is no genre elements whatsoever. It is just a drama. And it's amazing and heartbreaking. And what's interesting about him, though, is when you get kind of the Discarnates and this 80s period kind of represents like the apex for him of this curve that his career is on, where after he's had this period where he is working a little bit more traditionally, as his career starts to wind down, he starts to get into more of the surreal and kind of gonzo and very extremely, extremely stylized stuff, to the point of his last films, which are Onagatami and Labyrinth of Cinema, which are, obviously they are focused on much more outwardly serious themes. They're both about World War II. Most of his movies are about World War II.
Yeah, I was going to say even House. We kind of talked about that. It was a great sort of merging of the sort of style of horror that came from literally his daughter's sort of like nightmare logic fears, which he very sort of expressively surrealized and realized surreally, but then also infused that with, again, his own sort of like post-war anxieties and things like that. So it's very interesting that right out the bat you could see all these things that he was interested in doing, and it sounds like he didn't actually even lose that much interest in doing them. He just found he was like, I don't need to express them as intensely necessarily. I can have a little bit more control or patience, rather than like 90 straight minutes of, I'm going to get all this out. I'm going to flex.
But then he did. But then he went back to it, and as he was dying of cancer, he said, "I'm going to do 3 hours straight of this with Labyrinth of Cinema, and it's
Incredible.
going to be, that movie's unbelievable."
I'll have to check that out. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he full circle with this man.
He really did. But yeah, The Discarnates is really in that middle period of there are genre elements in this that are not just, it is not like a
They sneak up on you.
I don't know. Yeah, no, it's not like a movie like, I don't know why this is the one that came to mind, but The Time Traveler's Wife?
Yes.
I know what you're
It is
talking
not
about.
a movie where it's like, all right, we have this, this genre element, which is just sort of like the impetus to tell a more traditional romantic drama, right? It's
Right.
It kind of appears that that's the kind of movie that this is, and then at the end, all of a sudden, it is extremely not, and it's so good. But we could probably talk about that at the end of this segment.
Yeah. For sure.
No. I was quite surprised by this movie because again, having only been familiar with his experimental shorts and with House going into this, I went in, I'm interested to see what he does with kind of a ghost story, and this has a lot more of, House has dreamy qualities, but this has a more sort of patient kind of romantic quality. To it. It's really beautiful. It's really picturesque, and it's definitely layering in the fact that you are sort of watching a fantasy drama about essentially a divorced screenwriter who is reunited as he thinks with the ghosts of his dead parents, who have been sort of preserved in this sort of picture perfect nostalgic memory version of them as sort of younger, but he gets to engage with them as sort of a middle-aged man. And that's kind of like the very loose premise. But I like all the different sort of stylistic ways that he develops this. I mean, first of all, I really like how, first of all, by making him a screenwriter, how the profession relates to the experience that he's having. And, as a screenwriter, he's very accustomed to inventing and sort of imagining conversations, things that we see him do very early on when he's having like that conversation he has with his coworker, who works on the like cheap. It looks like they kind of make like soaps almost. It's hard to tell. The opening shot is him watching it on TV and like fast forwarding through parts because he thinks it's kind of lame.
Yeah, and then you get a great scene where he's actually interacting with some of the actors and actresses, and it seems like he feels like kind of misunderstood, or at least maybe not respected as much as he should be, because they
literally ask him to they ask him to like dumb down the words that he uses so that like the pretty actress can say them better. They're like, you're making it too hard for her. Right.
It's very funny too, and I like just how he stylizes that scene where she's going through the script, and as she's going through, for every word that she stumbles on, somebody else that's far away doing something else turns around and lets her know what the word is or whatever. Just as like a little comedic beat.
At the table read. Yeah,
it's good stuff. I liked it.
Yeah, but I like that just like right off the bat, it kind of shows you this sort of, a little bit of this sort of mundane reality of living in his condo. He feels like a little bit paranoid. He's like peering out the blinds into traffic. He's just sitting alone watching this TV show that, he's made that he's really not all that impressed with. He's even like giving the director notes even after he's watched the tape, being like, why are you like fucking up my writing? And then the director comes over, has dinner with him, and comes over and says, oh yeah, by the way, I can't work with you anymore because you just got a divorce and I'm really into your ex-wife and I'm going to pursue her now.
Sorry, bro.
Yeah. And like this guy's kind of he makes it clear that he was the one who decided to break up.
But yeah.
He's definitely weirded out by it, but he's definitely, there's
he's
still
trying to be
this
understanding, and he's trying to still like maintain some type of composure and I guess relationship with the guy.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to maintain a professional relationship. But it's also recognizably a bizarre situation. So watching him try to be professional in that situation is very funny. And I love that after he leaves, he kind of like replays and rehearses the conversation that he's just had. Doing the sorries and good lucks that they were just giving to each other, but assuming this might be the last time they see each other, and because of the moral situation that they are in, and then starts channeling that into a screenplay.
Yeah, and it seems like he does this all of the time just because he does it so quickly. It's almost like just something that
second nature,
an impulse. Yeah, exactly. And although I could see that being, constructive, just the quickness that he did it also made me a little concerned that he's not really he's actually taking these moments in and dealing with them. He's actually just living in his kind of like writerly mind. So yeah,
which is definitely an issue he has as the movie.
Eventually you have scenes where he's kind of writing in his head and he's doing it in like the back of a cab while the cab driver's like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? What's going on right now? So
he's very emotionally closed off in a way that is interesting, because of course part of the backstory is his parents were killed when he was very, very young, and he had to kind of raise himself. And I think he is sort of, because he is so alienated from his own emotions, he's sort of incapable of understanding like the difficulty of his own life in a way that is not like, it is only through this kind of reconciliation with his parents' ghosts and this at the emotional climax of the movie. I don't know. I don't want to skip right to it, but it makes me cry every time. This conversation with his parents over dinner where they talk about, because obviously he's an adult and they're appearing as adults, and they go to have dinner, and the dad is talking to the waitress about, his son as though he's not his son, but talking about, my friend here lost his parents when he was very young, but he worked so hard, and, then he really made it. And I'm getting choked up just talking about it because it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really like that, again, like there's this aspect in the early sequences of, sort of like this sort of mundane reality of the screenwriter who's kind of, feeling a little down about, both his divorce and his work. And there's also this girl on the third floor who keeps trying to like bother him and flirt with him that for some reason is very upsetting to him. And there's definitely, the sense of loneliness that is expressed visually to the character. And you can tell that he's sort of looking for something else. And this is very quickly, he does sort of find a kind of outlet of what he's hoping for by retreating into the past. And there's this great line that they pull from one of his TV shows that the girl keeps saying really stuck with her, which is, they say you can't bring the past back, but that's not true. You can if you want, because it's your past and it's part of you. You never lost it.
And that is Obayashi's filmography in miniature. Like,
there you go.
His films are very much about, he has 3 pet themes, and one is World War II, and the second one is memory and nostalgia, and the third one is that children shouldn't trust adults. And the last 2, for sure, are reflected in this movie. And I'll take a minute to say, like, the key sort of story, I say the key story, like, I'm speaking, I didn't know the man, I'm speaking in my capacity as a minor expert on his work. But like a key story that he has talked about from his childhood growing up during World War II is that he would remember when the adults would tell him and the other children, like, don't worry, Japan's not going to lose the war, but even if we do get invaded, we'll all kill ourselves, and I'll kill all of you, so don't even worry about it. And of course, that didn't happen. So he's talked about how that was the moment when he realized that adults are full of shit and nationalism is bullshit and stupid and it doesn't make any sense, and they're all just lying to you. And that's sort of obviously this is a film very much like a lot of his films about nostalgia, but it's also very much about like the inability to reconnect with childhood, as even if it's something you didn't have and that you want very badly.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what I really appreciated about this, is that like when he does start pursuing this sort of nostalgic fantasy that he is partaking in, where the film kind of walks the line on, are you watching something that's really literally happening, or is it some kind of dreamy internal expression, or, maybe a combination of both, maybe the latter manifesting into the former. And there's this really awesome, and again, very slowly developed stylistic switch that takes place as he's kind of depressed, scouting a location. I think he's scouting like a train station location. There's a great sort of like dollying over the line back and forth where he's kind of like in this shitty train. He's like, yeah, whatever. The train station fucking works for the show. Like, just, I don't know. I got spooked and scared. So, and I was alone. So he decided to go back to his hometown because he saw a sign for it while he was scouting out this location. And as he goes back to his hometown, these feelings of nostalgia for his 12-year-old self, who, as he put it, sort of, he laughed and cried and, wasn't shut off from his feelings, starts to come back to him. He's visiting the cafes. He's going to the town square. He goes to a vaudeville show, and he meets a guy in the audience who looks and sounds just like his dad, straight out of a photo. I love in that sequence, by the way, the synthy like carnival music playing during the show that they're doing. So good. But the movie in this, it totally changes even, sort of like the color timing switches. It gets this very sort of like orange tinted glow to it. It has this very sweet tone, and it really feels like this man has just been transported back to his childhood. The way that the music very the music swells and the city has this nostalgic glow. The camera moves are so smooth and so pretty as he joins the man back at his house, and he finds out that his mom is there as well, and he's ecstatic about this. And at first he thinks that they're just strangers that he is maybe projecting onto, and he's not even 100% convinced of it himself. And that's the scene in the cab, Jamie, that you were talking about, right, where he gets really drunk and he kind of forgets part of the conversation he just had with these people, and then he starts also, you know, rehearsing and maybe even inventing more conversation and things, and it all blends together. It's meant to kind of confuse you a little bit because he's in kind of like a state of shock and confusion as well.
Yeah, and even that drunken state directly connects to when he runs into the neighbor again and kind of forms that relationship. So it all becomes kind of like this blurry sequence of scenes when it comes to like him reconnecting with these people from the past.
Yeah, well, and I loved the cutting. I loved the cutting between him in the back of the cab thinking about the conversations that happened and then the actual conversations. They were kind of happening like back and forth. I thought of it mostly because we literally just talked about it 2 weeks ago on the show, but I was thinking about the scenes when Robert De Niro was talking to Jerry Lewis in King of Comedy, and there's like parts where, he's talking about how gracious, he is, that Jerry's going to let him be on his show and, let him do all of these things. But then it cuts to him in his room having the conversation in his head. And the same thing is happening here where he's having the conversation out loud to the cabbie, and the cabbie's like, what the fuck? What's going on? And he's completely lost in this, scene that he has just had. It literally is a scene from a movie that he's just experienced, and he's sort of, relaying it back to the audience in that way. It's really cool.
It's the way that Obayashi depicts memory as something you can sort of physically step into is something that resonates throughout a lot of his films. The opening of The Deserted City is amazing. It's another one of his guy goes back to his hometown movies, kind of. And it's this guy, kind of walking the streets of this town where he stayed for a summer as a teenager and sort of flits between color and black and white. And it's like he's physically walking through his memories, as he's doing this. And of course, Labyrinth of Cinema is a movie about three kids who are transported into the past, literally, or maybe metaphorically. It's vague, by way of watching old war movies. That's like the culmination of this stylistic choice he's been making for 40 years.
Yeah, no, it's really, really cool because it feels exactly like that. It feels like a character stepping into, a photographic, sort of nostalgic memory that they have. And the movie frequently, again, sometimes in a single shot, it will actually change its lighting setup depending on how he feels in that moment. Like there's one great sequence where he returns back to the house visiting the mom, and it looks like what the parents are doing, like when he's not there, and she's literally just sitting alone in like this sort of like void almost. And then as soon as, they actually see him and he walks in and he walks up to the house, all of a sudden, like there's an orange sunset, there now in the space. Like it literally changes what, everything looks like based on, his decision to actually go back into it, because there is kind of this push and pull between, this memory, this relationship that he might be able to have with his parents that he never got to have as a kid. And, a lot of this film is just this middle-aged man being treated like a child by two people who are, very clearly younger than him. I love that, he's going over and like helping the mom make ice cream. And she's like, your clothes are going to get all sweaty. And she's like taking them off and like hanging them up for him and like, treating him like a child. He's playing a very bright game of catch with his dad. It's very childhood fantasy dreams of things that you would be doing with your parents, and and of course lots of eating. They always want to go to restaurants or make dinner. But it's really really beautiful watching him get sort of swept up, and the filmmaking gets you really swept up in this fantasy that he is having, and the way that it's sort of stylized to kind of feel and look like an old photograph, and he's seeing the ghosts of his parents in their most beautiful and idealized form, and there is, however, a kind of switch about 55 minutes in or so, and it was kind of set up earlier in the film, but around that time, the sort of, some of the really nice sort of longer takes that are happening and some of the, more idyllic images of, sort of him riding around town with his dad, or, it starts to have these more feverish qualities brought into it. There's like a bike flying through the air, or there's overlaid footage. There's actually a really cool technique I hadn't seen before either, where it looked like he was doing overlaid footage, but with like two different shooting speeds on them. That I wasn't sure exactly how he did. But these, and then obviously also the color kind of changes sometimes too, where that glow kind of disappears and it turns into more of like this desaturated kind of gray street, despite the fact that the image is the same. And you're wondering kind of like what's happening here, and what's happening is what is literally happening in the style. He is being drained of life somehow. Yeah. We aren't, it's not explicitly clear how, but you do assume it is related to this, that by spending time eating food with his parents all day, he is, receding into a picture and actually, losing track of what's happening to his real body. And he is slowly transforming, as he can sort of spot in these very shocking reflective images. He has slowly turned into a literal corpse over the course of the film, which gives the fantasy sequence this tinge of kind of darkness to them, that that these things are draining him of life as he's, but you understand his impulse to want to live in them at the same time. Yeah. So that stuff's all really really well done, and lots of really sort of like subtle style cues that get you into it. And also there is a I guess important subplot about the girl who lives on the third floor down from him, who he kind of blows off on the first night, but feels bad about doing that on later nights. And as he comes home from his parents and stays in his condo, he starts striking up a relationship with her, and kind of relating over their loneliness and maybe past experiences and tragedies. It's implied that she had some sort of accident with a fire and has very much scarred her chest, which I appreciated. Like a kind of ugly detail like that, especially when it gets as sexually explicit as this movie does, where she's like, literally, don't look at the burns while we're having sex, or what does she describe it as? It's like you ever heard of those myths where like it's forbidden to look at her? Like it's like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. What it reminds me of, and I think it's the way I would describe this subplot is like he weaves in like a campfire story basically, into this movie. And it's what it reminds me of most is the old story about, the man who married the girl with the ribbon around her neck. Oh yeah. And he says, you can never take the ribbon off my neck ever, even after we're married. And of course, I won't tell you what happens, but maybe But that's what it reminded me of. It's a very sort of, a three beat little spooky tale that is happening kind of parallel and thematically parallel to the sort of main thrust of the film. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked a lot of the sequences with her, because a lot of her is, that she's experienced some of the same sort of alienated feelings that he is, and kind of finding solace by spending time with him. And obviously it is kind of meant a little bit as like she's the real girl in the real world, and by continuing to recede into this fantasy, you are, sacrificing this real thing that you could have. And obviously, as we get into the kind of finale, that ends up actually being kind of reversed in a really interesting way, and that the detrimental effect might not necessarily have been something to do with his parents, even though it is there sort of emotionally and thematically that you can't just live in a fantasy all the time. That's definitely not something the movie is suggesting. But it wasn't the literal plot cause, we will say. Right. Yeah. But I just really like the switching between the styles of having, these overwhelmingly happy sequences that kind of pull him in, of playing catch and playing cards and eating dinner, these beautiful sequences with his parents, and they, and then they as they take on this more melancholy vibe, with our knowledge of, that living in this picturesque world is doing real damage to, his tangible sort of existence, and watching him even as a character wrestle with that, where he keeps going back knowing that it's costing him, his body in a way, but he keeps going back because that's how much he feels for it. That's how much he wishes he could go back to this time where he wasn't this kind of jaded adult. Even and at one point he even like suspects that the food is poisoning him, so he decides not to eat it, even though he clearly loves it. And as soon as he starts eating a bowl of his mom's delicious creamy ice cream, he starts like crying because it's so good. Yeah. So yeah, lots of really great stuff like that just really switches between, how kind of, romantic and how melancholy it is. And, eventually leading to a really, really dark sort of existential place where it's revealed that the woman who he's been spending all of his time with and actually chose to leave his parents over, in a really devastating scene that Esther was talking about, like when the last time that he sees his parents. I think that's actually a scene worth going back to once, because they take him to a restaurant knowing it's the last time they're going to see him, and they kind of accept they're causing him pain as ghosts, and they don't want to do that. Yeah. And that image of those two fading away literally right in front of his eyes.
Oh yeah, and so sad.
Saying how proud they are, even though, he's also trying to explain that, his life isn't as perfect as he said, because again, when he was talking to his parents, he was like, look, I'm grown up. I'm so well adjusted. I'm a professional screenwriter. You can watch my work on TV and, that sounds really good, but that's not how he feels about that stuff, right? Like he's kind of putting on a happy front for how he feels about his success as a person, and watching him break down in that last scene where he's just like, that's, I fucked up my own family and my relationship with my wife and my kid. I'm, not super pleased with all the work that I am doing. I'd be a much better, more successful person if I had had you, my parents, in my life. Mm-hmm. And watching him break down as they literally fade away into, sort of the sort of sunset light that's right behind them in the restaurant, and revealing him to be just sitting there eating alone as the light kind of disappears as well. Really, really strong stuff, and really just a really great effect. I think it's a good example of a kind of effect that we probably saw Obayashi use before, but done with just, a lot more, pointed control to it. A lot more here's the exact emotion I want you to get out of these characters fading away into the background of the image that I've shot. Yeah. So yeah, that stuff's really, really fantastic. And then again, you
contrast that with the horrific ending that he brings to us.
The horrific ending, which is which totally blew my mind when I watched it, because I had kind of been lulled into the rhythms of the film by the time that this came, and then I was oh, what the hell? Because it literally goes full Exorcist mode.
Yeah. This is why I love this movie as a second Obayashi, if you've seen House first, because I get to bring you in with he didn't just make House, he made some more normal movies too. And then you get to the end and you're like, you've been tricked into believing. I mean, it is the case, but
he wasn't going to get as explosive and crazy as you might expect. And then, he absolutely just does.
And even with the style, find out, he starts to incorporate all of the colors that are going on, and the thunder and lightning that's going off in the background and everything. He just goes super stylized in this, and it's
very exaggerated. It's great, because his coworker returns to check up on him, because this entire time he's been he hasn't really been coming into work. He's just been sitting in not his apartment, in the apartment on the third floor where he said that he's been seeing a girl, and the doorman goes, There's no girl living on the third floor. She killed herself. She gutted herself with a cheese knife. and you're like, wait, what? And my immediate thought was that, oh my God, he's been imagining this girl as well, which would have been just really depressing. And then it turns out that that's not true, that she definitely is there. And God, when that coworker goes up into that room, that incredible zoom on his face on the bed, where he just looks like a zombie, essentially.
Years old, yeah.
White hair, he's all out of it, and yeah, the makeup is great, and he's like, "Leave me alone!" And there's the storm going, the lightning going. It's very foggy. There's wind and light everywhere.
She's got a smile on her face, kind of too, like a devilish little smirk going on.
Yeah, and
Which
she,
you haven't
in that
seen from her
moment,
yet,
she
so
starts
it's kind of
floating.
jarring.
She starts floating and confessing to killing herself, and that by the action that he committed earlier, by turning her away when she was kind of herself at her loneliest, that she decided to kill herself that night. And it's obviously, you know, like a really devastating moment where he realizes that he partially contributed to that decision, and after the fact, he has fallen in love with her, and he's like screaming, and just watching that where he, you know, like he is like this zombified man. She is like a floating ghost woman who's the dress finally reveals the scars, because she's not a burn victim. She had stabbed herself many times in the chest, and it literally starts spurting blood everywhere, like full like Coppola Dracula operatic craziness. And as this is happening, this extremely ugly image, these two characters are being like, I do love you. Like, it's so like they are having a completely different conversation that is meant to be very romantic and about the feelings that they, you know, the solace that they have brought each other away from this loneliness that they feel. Yeah. But, you know, not being able to sort of like deny the reality of what happened, which was that she killed herself. And yeah, watching that reality hit him in the face as like a giant bucket of blood is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. And it's huge. Like, they are head to toe covered in blood from it spurting out of her chest as she's floating through the air. And yeah, just what an image to see that accompanied by feelings and thematic feelings that you completely are made to understand, which is that these two sort of romantic longing for each other, despite the incredibly, you know, ugly circumstances of reality. And yeah, watching him finally come to terms with the fact that that is just, you know, the world isn't a picture perfect kind of place, but you know, he should.
He really goes through it at the end, like in the last hour or two in his timeline, he's you know, had to say goodbye once again to his parents forever, and then he has to realize that his newfound love is actually a ghost that's been, you know, using him to suck the life force of some kind or something like that. I wasn't entirely certain, but there was still just the double loss there was very impactful to me.
Yeah.
He had a very heartbreaking couple hours there. Like, everything he thought he was gaining,
the very
is now
emotional
lost.
loss of, you know, being able to spend time with his parents again, and then the very physical loss of this woman that he has become romantically involved with, covering him in blood and leaving.
Yeah, and at the very least, though, he does have, you know, the physical loss of these three people. But what I do like in the end is that it still gives him like some catharsis. He has a reconnection with his son, and he seems like he's actually more focused on the work he wants to do, and he's doing what he wants to do. And he even, you know, and we can get into more detail now that we're there, but even has a moment of, at least for him, clarity where he thinks it was real. And even if it wasn't, in a sense it was, just because he experienced those things, and, you know, those are going to be memories for him, regardless of if they physically happened.
It was a very cathartic experience that we got to undergo with this character. Yeah. And yeah, precisely. Like, there's a sense of ambiguity that it's an ambiguity that it feels like the coworker wants to
Yeah,
have
'cause that's
versus
the thing.
necessarily because he's like, I don't want to believe what I just saw, and so we're gonna forget about that real
'Cause it's
quick.
like
Like it
that-
definitely.
That was one of my big questions at the end. I think you're completely right, because he walks in that apartment and he sees all of that. He sees the floating girl. He sees the 150-year-old
Yes.
version of his friend. He sees the blood splatter and all of that. But at the end, he's just kind
Exactly.
of like, you were just stressed, man. We were all just stressed out, and that's what we experienced.
We're just gonna go on living, you know. That's
Yeah, yeah, and I like that he's still able to look at the location and say, like, no, regardless of whether it was real or not, it was real to me, and that's enough. So it's
yeah.
beautiful.
He really got
Although
he really got
heartbreaking.
to spend the summer with his dead parents and a girl who killed herself, and together they all had a great summer together.
Yeah, like two versions of a second chance kind of thing. Because he had that moment with the woman where I guess he could have been a little bit more kind and inviting, and I guess with his parents, so they were just ripped away. But that's more of just a second chance at having a real childhood, which is also beautiful. So yeah, it's really good stuff, and the genre switching and the quickness of it is I thought very jarring at first, but I actually watched this twice, and once I had the entire context of everything and I was looking at it, knowing where it led, it felt a little more clear to me. Just because some of the contrasts are quite large, and I found going from the yellow tinge
Sequences with the parents to like
past
going
and,
back
like-
to his condo and stuff, where he's
Yeah.
where she's like, look in the mirror, and he's looking in the mirror, and he's
old, and it felt
He's this
very
dying
jarring,
man.
but it really does come together by the end, I think, in a really cool way. So yeah, this is great.
Yeah, I think it's a very, I think it's stylistically blended very well, and definitely very thematically sound. Once you get to the end, and all the mysteries have kind of been resolved, and you get to think about it in retrospect, and all of that stuff is definitely really strong. Yeah, but maybe pivoting to reductive rating round on the Discarnates. This is going to get a really solid 4 from me. Maybe even I'd have to watch it again, but maybe even a high 4, because I think that this was, I only got to watch it the one time, and I do kind of want to check it out a second time, because I was definitely shocked by the last. About 10 and 15 minutes or so, because I kind of grooved with the elements that I think Jamie was finding a little bit more jarring on the first watch, because I just thought the style was so controlled, and I thought that it had this really effective, confident sort of buildup to it, and it definitely was moving at a slower pace than I've come to expect of Obayashi, and it leaves a lot of room for you to sit in the feelings of the characters and kind of absorb some of the details that we are sort of learning through the conversations that he's having with his parents, and some of the details about both what happened to them and maybe how he had to take care of himself, and maybe how that had an effect on sort of the his emotionally shut off state that he's currently in.
And that time really helps with the ending, really.
Exactly. Well, because I think that really emotionally accentuates the genre thrills when they actually do arrive. And then when he lets loose, those elements are crazy. Definitely has the most rotting flesh and floating women and blood spurting that you will see in what is otherwise like a fairly romantic drama. Very picturesque. And I did really like, Esther kind of, the fact that this has become sort of a trait of Obayashi, and that a lot of the things that he's been interested in doing have been kind of like these physical manifestations of these memories, and maybe being things that you could walk into, but also being something that as a filmmaker you have to kind of construct and invent and imagine. I liked how those two things blend together with this character, watching him rehearse conversations and then have them actually for real. And also as a, I like how it relates to him, like watching his own images on the TV, like we watch him see the things that get broadcast into the world, all of these scenes of him, people not just watching TV, but sometimes also citing his lines of dialogue back to him is really cool. It contributes, I think, to these artistic anxieties, about an individual's relationship to the thing that they create and kind of send out into the world. And it layers a little bit more ambiguity into the fantasy sequences with his parents, because you do spend a lot of the movie wondering, is he imagining this? Is this like a movie that's happening in his head? Yeah. It's just so dreamy and so romantic. And as it develops the sort of eerier qualities, it is just a really solid horror movie about memory and nostalgia and wishing to recede into it, despite the fact that it might literally be draining your life, or you might be choosing not to live a life that you could be having. Which is why I find it so painful when you get to those shocking genre moments at the end where he fits in the ghost story elements, because he ultimately does choose. He does go, this fantasy version of my parents isn't worth sacrificing a real romance I could have with a real woman. And then that woman is a ghost as well. And the fact that, it pulls that twist and somehow at the end, it goes to those really dark places and still ends in a place that I find very sweet and kind of life affirming in a way. I think it's very moving. And I think that the style is very subjective and atmospheric, and I think it all really works. So solid 4 for me.
Yeah, me too. The first time it was like a strong 3, but I felt like having the context. It's almost like you don't really know you're watching a horror movie until the last half hour or so, and then having that knowledge and then going back to those scenes in the first hour, I think just really helps with clarifying the connections between his relationship with the girl and the relationship with his parents, and how he's kind of trying to find catharsis between the two. It just helped a lot to clarify a few things, because the way that he stylizes things can be very jarring, and I mean that in a very good way. So I love the contrast in the look just between like the modern time. A lot of the time when he's in his apartment, it's usually like dark. Sometimes it's raining, and then when he visits his family or his parents, it's got this yellow or orange tinge to it. It just feels like this bright and sunny summer day. Just everything's perfect, and I loved those scenes constantly going back and forth. And I really liked that the character, although goes through some really horrific things, at the end does get some type of redemption, and he learns to have a relationship with his son, and learns to move forward instead of just constantly looking back. So I do think that it was a well-deserved ending for the character. I'm glad it didn't end entirely in heartbreak. So yeah, this was really good. I gotta tackle more of this director, because I feel like I really latch on to his kind of dreamscape, the way that he makes his films very just dreamlike. I love it. So I'm definitely gonna tackle some more. Esther.
Hell yeah, Esther. I was gonna say, what's the third one? You said this is the second one you like to show people. What's the third one?
My favorite film of all time is his Motorbiker Island. I can't. Maybe you'll have me on in 2 more years, and maybe I can talk about that one. But you should watch it sooner than that, because it's amazing.
When you say that there's that one movie you were mentioning where he dives into his past, going through like the city that he grew up in, and obviously this would be different, but is it similar to how, have you seen Siberia?
I have not. No.
Okay. But Josh, do you know what I'm saying? Where it's kind of like him revisiting some of his youth and past, kind of going through his memories, but in this very dark and dreamlike way. I guess it wouldn't be as dark probably with him, but
yeah. Ferreira does it in kind of like this subjective, psychological kind of like funhouse kind of quality, where he's kind of like walking in on scenes from previous times and things like that. I guess Jamie is asking if Obayashi has ever done anything like that, or if he has like sort of a different way of approaching going back through your memories, kind of like a photo album.
Gosh, not in the Deserted City. That is definitely that is a more traditionally structured film. In general, but I'm trying to think, because I think he has done something like that, where that's sort of a figure in the future having that kind of physical presence in their own memories. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure he has. Definitely in his later stuff, he gets a lot more playful with setting and with where people are in a scene, and when people are in a scene. His film Casting Blossoms to the Sky, which is one of his war trilogy films, which is sort of like, I like to say it's his take on an essay film, but it's much, much stranger than what you probably think of when you hear that. Does a lot of that in terms of kind of mixing and matching and having people sort of take almost like a walking tour of a scene in the past.
Okay.
It's really, really cool.
Cool. But the Discarnates for you, Esther, is this the 5?
This is the 5. I only bring bangers on here.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite Obayashis. Not my number 1, but it is top 3. I think it's phenomenal.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you bought it. Because I've been thinking about it since I watched it 2 days ago. So I've been it's been in my mind. All those idyllic surfaces have just been sitting in there, and then also the insanely creepy and explosive finale, and how those two relate. Those two things relate to each other. I think anyone watching it for the first time, you might get your wires crossed a little bit, but I think it is really, really well developed and like thought through. It's very considered. I think.
Yeah, I felt like the first time I watched it, it was my fault. That's why I watched it a second time. Actually, I finished it and I went, no, I didn't grasp that correctly. I'm gonna revisit this one. So yeah, it's really, really, really solid.
Awesome. So if you can find this one, highly recommend checking out the Discarnates from 1988. But I think that's going to wrap it up for that, and we are going to be right back. And we are going to be talking about a ghost film from just 4 years later called Ghostwatch.
On Saturday night, we'll be visiting the most haunted house in Britain. But will the ghosts be there? Can you take it?
Ghostwatch, a Screen One special for Halloween, Saturday at 9:25 on One.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Ghostwatch, the 1992 British, as described here, reality horror pseudo-documentary television film, first broadcast on BBC One on Halloween night, 1992. It is written by a man named Stephen Folk and directed by Leslie Manning. This was a sort of television special that was produced by the BBC, starring a lot of BBC anchors and reporters. And it is, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it is a sort of fictionalized show where these reporters investigate, the sort of paranormal goings on of a small British community and a family who lives in a flat where they are having strange things, objects flying, girls being attacked, all kinds of various things that are happening that feel supernatural and paranormal. And so this team of broadcasters, very dry British broadcasters, are going in to investigate, and they are televising it. Supposedly they are televising it live. That is the way that it is sort of made to look, but it was actually shot obviously in advance and is definitely more of sort of a reality TV sort of mockumentary, I guess, kind of style, but without sacrificing, once again, exactly like the Obayashi film, the fact that it is a real deal horror film at the same time. And very, very famously, as we alluded to in the intro, this movie or TV special created a huge controversy in the UK about the ethics of live TV and broadcasting things that, might be fictionalized.
Yeah, it was very similar to like War of the Worlds when that caused a ruckus. back on the radio stations.
Yes, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, definitely one of the great pieces of accidental prank art.
Yes.
And you can add Ghostwatch to the list of prank art that is also just incredibly well done and really convincingly done, which is why it had the uproar that it did, because they just aired it randomly, 9 p.m., Halloween night. Apparently the BBC did require them because they actually were concerned, and they nearly pulled the show at one point. They insisted they had to add opening credits to include the writer's name and the title of the thing and the people who are in it. But they did it in the most hilarious way possible, where it was like 5 seconds of opening credits.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So everybody tuned in late. Everyone tuned in at like 9:01 and missed that and thought they were just watching a live broadcast.
Yeah, like imagine you've missed even an hour of it, right? And you're in the last half hour where the girl is speaking like the devil and doing nursery rhymes and shit, and you're just like, this is live on BBC right now. What's going on? Like, I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's great. If you didn't see the first 30 seconds of this, because again, the most important thing about this is that it's real BBC anchors who are like very, very well known. It would be like if Brian Williams and Lester Holt were doing a special live broadcast about a haunted house and all of this happened. If you tuned in at that point, you would have no reason not to believe it was real. And they were doing other things that, they were doing fake call-ins. Like they had a call-in number. But of course all the call-ins are scripted. But you don't know that. There were people calling in being like, I think I saw some, and you had no way of knowing that it wasn't real. It's you kind of talked about, Josh. It's not really a found footage movie per se, because it's not, the backstory is not that the footage was found, but it is definitely shares something in common with sort of, obviously it is a supposed documentation of real events.
Yes.
But also it kind of has that, like the Blair Witch Project, has that kind of prank sensibility of like, part of the experience of this movie is that you are being tricked into thinking that it is real. And in the Blair Witch's case, it was something that happened. And in this case, it's something that is happening right now and that in fact could be happening to you in your house.
Yeah. Yeah. The movies just have two very different ideas on how to blend that reality, how to imitate that sort of aesthetically. Because I think we talked about, when we talked about Blair Witch with you, the thing that's kind of cool about found footage in general is that it changes the way that you're watching something. It sort of leaves you unprepared for the eventual genre shocks that it's going to turn, because of the sort of like inherent kind of distance you have from some of the things that you're watching. And now in Blair Witch Project, there's more of kind of like this sort of blurrier, kind of more abstracted quality to that film. I think you talked about the forbidden sort of VHS quality to it, whereas this creates that distance through a deliberate TV flatness. It has this sort of constructed set and TV personalities that you perhaps even have a relationship with because you watch them on the nightly news every night. And watching that form of hysteria and breakdown take place in that setting, I think makes it more shocking when it eventually does happen, because you're watching a literal set be destroyed. You're watching these people who have these, performances that they put on for the broadcast be shattered by, the actual events that are taking place in the film.
Because the camera is physically there. They're, like that's something that comes into play a lot, especially when they have the live network that's viewing them outside in the van. And so they can kind of start doing tricks like what we saw with Scream, for instance, where they kind of have either not necessarily a delay, what they use in this movie. It's more like it sets up a false present that's happening. Like they're all at the table just playing a video, like we're just playing a game. And in reality, the house is completely just a mess and things are going crazy and people are screaming and all of that. So I like that they get to play with that kind of format throughout as well. And I love that the hosts, and for a while too, aren't like, they're taking it as seriously as they can, but they're not taking it probably as seriously as they should, especially given that the performances from the family are just giving off this dread and exhaustion, and like we've been through the ringer with this thing, and yet you have these hosts that like Sarah.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think the blonde,
they are
she's
absolutely
quite nice,
skeptics, and some of them are treating it like a joke, right?
Right, exactly. Like they're coming, especially the one bald guy. He's kind of like every single thing he does is a joke. Where even when he's interviewing people about like a child being stabbed in the playground and stuff, he's still adding like that kind of TV host humor or whatever.
Like, haha, isn't this we're in England's Amityville? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, this woman was telling me about how a 5-year-old got stabbed. Tell me a little more, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's just I like that, and slowly the distance just kind of it shrinks because they're kind of just forced to reckon with the supernatural forces at hand. So it's I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's great, and I especially love the dry British cadence of the broadcasters and the whole thing. Like because this form of news, I don't know, sort of. I guess I think American news is kind of maybe a bit different, but like this kind of news is exactly what Canadian news is like as well. And so I was sitting there going like, yeah, it's just some old guy just talking in a really kind of like he has a little bit of that radio personality charisma, but like
pleasant
not the most amount, really. Like most of he basically makes a career out of just like describing the mundane things around him,
right?
And
in a calm, collected voice, yeah.
Exactly, and being kind of like, in order to not be biased, we're going to invite this skeptic on to kind of talk about it, and it's just very clearly they intended this to be a very boring news broadcast, and the movie is so good at aesthetically replicating that, and having the performances replicate that while slowly cranking the scares and making the scenarios just a little bit scarier and scarier as the movie goes on. A little bit of detail here, a little bit of a ghost in a video footage that they kind of see. They go, oh, that's weird, right? I don't really see anything. Like,
I like that it's a caller that sets that off too. Like it was someone watching the live broadcast, and they're like, oh, I saw something. I can give information to help their investigation.
And it's teaching you how to watch the movie too, because if you haven't already, go to YouTube and look up Ghostwatch all pipe sightings, because there are so many that the first time I watched this movie, I couldn't believe how much the ghost is in this movie, and it just flies right by you. Yeah. They're so good at hiding him.
I only caught the one where. There's the one where it sort of pans across the bedroom after the face scratching scene. I caught him there. Obviously, the really big one where he's behind the cellar door as they close it, but they don't see him. The standing behind the doctor while they're listening to the tape in the studio was one of the really creepy ones. Yes. And then the only other one I caught was walking around in the background in the park while he's interviewing the various neighbors. But I think I only caught like 4. And apparently there's like 15 or something, or somewhere around there.
That's crazy.
There's an incredible amount. Yeah, it's so cool. And it reminds me, if you've seen the movie Lake Mungo, another one of my favorite movies. Really it's entirely premised on this idea of like, we just showed you something, but now look at it again, and there was something scary there. It just hits every time. And Ghostwatch is like, the foundation of that. I think, and that's this idea that
I think that's the thing about like ghost stories that are so scary, or just the general thought that something was there but you didn't know it was. Like I always think back to an old it's like the old babysitting horror stories where it's like I felt the dog licking my hand, and then I found out they didn't have a dog, that kind of thing. It's that thought that you thought something was happening and it was normal and comfortable, but later on you get the information that you were in a very, very either dangerous or just uncomfortable space, and you had no idea, and that almost just adds to the discomfort.
Yeah. No,
so much of it is when it's really playing with like, it's almost a participatory film in that way. It's like, and as obviously when you get to the climax, and it's in that almost like that 50s way of like, and it's happening to you right now, and it's in the theater. A great story that I love from the making of this movie is that one thing that they wanted to do but couldn't is that they wanted to include in the broadcast a high-pitched tone that only pets would be able to hear. So as the film is going on, your pets in your house start freaking out because they're hearing this noise.
That's awesome.
It's so fucking cool. I
like a
wish that they had been able
move.
to do it.
Oh man, that's wild.
Yeah, or the Tingler. Who's the Tingler guy?
Oh,
remember
right.
that was one that
it,
we
going across the screen and stuff as if it's taking over your television.
Yeah, exactly. Knowing that, it's so cool that this is honestly just one of the most like confidently crafted, out of nowhere gimmick movies that I've ever seen. Yeah. And well before its time, because obviously it predates, Blair Witch, which we already talked about. With Esther and how much we liked it, and
it predates the Conjuring too, because it's the same. Obviously, it's a different format or the way they're using the genre, but it's the same story about the two daughters that thought that they were possessed, and I think it was like the Einfeld haunting or something like that.
The Einfeld poltergeist, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
which
so
was
I
like
that was cool.
the little girls with the disembodied voices and thrown toys and children levitating. Definitely a kind of fear that was bubbling in the 70s. And
that story also, of course, became the basis of the film The Conjuring 2 many years later.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it blows my mind. Like, imagine watching this live on TV when it would have been spectacular. Like 11 million people watched this and were genuinely terrifying. Like apparently they did get a lot of calls that people were just really enjoying the program. I don't know how true that is, but because the movie did earn the honor of being known as the first TV program cited in the British Medical Journal for having caused post-traumatic stress disorder in children.
Damn.
There was something like there was 2 confirmed cases, and there was like 5 or 6 others that they sort of hinted at but didn't necessarily get actually blamed for. And they also there's also a suicide that they try to attach to the film as well, because they say the 18-year-old boy who watched the film, the parents described him as sort of like hypnotized by what he had seen, and he didn't believe his reality anymore or something like that. And so like as a result, this was like there was outrage over the BBC playing this, and it never aired. Like the BBC basically said they would never air it again, and the only other place it did get aired eventually was in Canada. But it was like many years later, and people had heard of it by then. So,
and the thing is, like the way that they really milk it, like the horror, it does go on for quite a bit, where it's mostly just like stories from locals and stories from people that are calling in, and the doctor giving kind of her analysis on things. And it's only in the last like 20 minutes when you start to really rev up the ghostly encounters. So I could imagine if, you're a kid sitting there, you could think maybe your child next to you could watch this and it would be completely fine. They're just talking about the ghost. It's a little scary here and there. It's Halloween night, whatever.
Yeah, it's Halloween night. This is what the news does on Halloween. They do a Halloween themed little expose. That's all it is.
Yeah. And then it turns into this crazy demonic thing where all of Britain is possessed by this character that I forget the name of now. But it's crazy how long they milk it before they really start to explode all the horror stuff in a good way.
Yeah, honestly, it takes like an hour before this would probably be just indistinguishable from watching like a real,
like a ghost
the real
thing,
where it's like literally just them like interviewing locals, and the way that they move between the studio, where it's like there's the anchor and then there's the doctor, who is someone who believes the family and is there kind of like presenting their case to the audience and showing all of the evidence. Like there's even moments where they're walking through the studio and they're like, here's the various evidence from around the house, like the drawings that the little girls made of the creepy figure, and like so
and the
like
actress that plays Dr. Lynn is really convincing. I really liked her performance. She's just very like relaxed and composed with her performance, and I like for instance, I liked her thought on when she's going up against the skeptic. And she says something like, these supernatural things can't be replicated in a lab. It's kind of like inspiration or something along those natures. Like you can't measure.
Yeah, or falling in love. Like it's not scientifically provable, but like, you know, something is happening. There's some sort of something manifesting here.
And it's a little like poetic.
These people are traumatized, this mother and her two daughters.
But I think it's a good perspective to have, especially when you have the flip that they kind of do where, you know, it shows that the daughter was banging on the pipes to kind of fake them out and make them think that the ghost was happening when it wasn't. It just kind of it creates this perspective that it still could be happening. It's not something that is going to be as easy to prove as something that would just happen over and over again, like a scientific experiment. So I liked her character in general.
Yeah, no, I think the stroke of genius really is, you know, making all of these people like the actual British broadcasters and stuff do, because I think she's one of the few only actual actresses along with like the family,
right?
But like the phone-in presenter, the interviewer, the reporter, and the sort of head anchor Michael Parkinson, they are all the real broadcasters interacting with this fictional story and lending it that sort of credence, and watching them be like, tonight we are going to find irrefutable proof that ghosts do exist, and they're kind of like hamming it up a little bit in the program and everything too, and like playing pranks on each other and like kind of giggling that they're like, you know, we're a little paranormal research team, and like even the montage of them like loading up the equipment into the car and like getting the lights ready to go, and that stuff's all really great.
There are moments too where Dr. Lin is beside the main host and he kind of does these like little jabs at like, you know, are we going to really find a ghost or whatever? And you can see on her face that she's actually like pissed off. Like she's the only one in the scene that's not laughing or making any jokes, because, you know, she's been, we find out eventually that she's been with this family for, you know, however many weeks and has actually seen these things happen. So she takes them just as seriously as the family does, but everyone surrounding her is essentially just laughing at her and mocking her.
Yeah. And I like that they get into the sort of like, in the peripheral detail, they'll get into like the pain of that. Like I really like the fact that, you know, the family kind of lays out the history on the broadcast to, you know, like, yeah, we went to a social worker and they said that we should just see a psychiatrist. And then we talked to, you know, when that didn't work, we talked to the media and they just started sort of sensationalizing it and trying to make us all just look like a bunch of morons. And which is exactly what like this crew, it's exactly what the BBC is trying to do.
Yeah, the one, I think her name's Sarah, the blonde host. She, I think, does try her best to kind of balance the two things, where she knows that she's a host and needs to probably keep people calm at home. But at the same time, she is also the most sympathetic and empathetic towards the family. Like she's always the one trying to help the little girls if they're getting scared, or really talking to the mother as a human being rather than the other hosts, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that this is like in terms of its style, I think I was what I ended up being most impressed by, because the handheld camera work with like the boom and the crew and everything in it is constantly, you know, obviously giving it a little bit of authenticity, but then they also, in the way that they've set it up, they've given themselves a bunch of options in the editing room as well.
Right.
Like there's all these amazing wide angle lens sort of like overhead setups around the house that they frequently cut back to in really, sort of shocking moments, and the way that they kind of like bring the studio lights to the house, and the kind of calculated imperfections of the sound and the image as they, you know, are replicating this very live, spontaneous sort of situation where they're constantly, I like that, you know, this is a very overtly constructed film, but there are moments where the characters have to be like, well, while we're waiting for more calls, why don't we go see what so-and-so is up to? And like the guy is like not ready to cut to him. And he's like, oh shit. Like right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They really lean into the kind of live aspect, which is a good thing. And once again, another really fun way of kind of tricking the audience too.
Yeah, I mean, like, despite doing that, like, this is very clearly, it's very considered in its blocking and in its movement, and there's great long tracking shots that are kind of get lost in the chaos with the characters sometimes, and there's these edits that sometimes try to pull us out from that chaos and have us just be kind of creepy observers sometimes. That really works. And like the previous one we were talking about, the Discarnates, it's really good at slowly developing detail and twisting tension out of these characters, and as Esther pointed out, like really teaching you how to engage with the film as you there are times where you get lulled into being taking it as seriously as some of these reporters are, and then a small detail will crop up and you'll be like, that's fucking weird, please look into that, what are you guys doing? There are moments of frustration, I think, built into the film really well. And it's really clever and creepy.
Yeah, another good aspect of the live thing is where the main host in the studio, he's even having moments where he's starting to doubt the story. I think it's the moment, like I mentioned, where the little girl was hitting the pipes or whatever. And you can see him kind of in this panicked mode where he's still trying to keep the special going, but he knows that he has his, higher ups that are going to get insanely pissed off at him if he starts to still kind of indulge in the ghostly aspects of this, because, they find it irresponsible or whatever. And so that was just another interesting aspect I liked about the relation between, like, the studio he works for, him as a host that's trying to engage with this ghost story, him engaging with human beings that are trying to tell them that this is real and happening. But he, even if he wanted to,
and they're being like, what, really, a guy named Pipes? Come on.
Yeah. and really, even if he wanted to, I think that there's that pressure working for, the BBC, some giant studio, that you can't really dig in any deeper at a certain point, just because he himself might get fired or whatever else, So I like that too. I thought that was clever.
I definitely like that Parkinson is there to try to just maintain a level of control.
Yeah. As best
because as the film gets slowly more, chaotic and kind of hysterical, especially in the really big finale, you can see that that's like what he's professionally trained to do. And there's something scary about, that sort of being activated inside him to keep doing that. Yeah. Even though there's there's nothing stopping what it is that they, what they have unleashed. Yeah. Which is essentially this ghost that is sort of doled out mysteriously over the course of the film, where they find out that, like, he was a child molester and abuser who lived with his aunt and uncle, who thought that he was being possessed by, what did he think that he was being possessed by? It was another spirit, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
I'm trying to
think about the specifics here. Yeah.
Yeah. But like someone who also like hurt children. And just, I really like the way that they, they throw in details, like throughout the film, you can hear like cats screaming is a thing that is very recurring.
They mentioned that when they found his body, all the cats were feeding on his face. And so I think that's where
because he killed himself and locked his cats in with him into the cupboard under the stairs. And as a result, when they found him, the cats were starving and basically eating him and screaming. And so that's why, you find out obviously later in the film, but it's really cool the way that they develop a lot of these small little details, or, the fact that they show the little girl's sort of description and drawing of this person Pipes that they see. Even calling him Pipes is kind of cool, because it's the mom gives him that name. Right. Because the girls keep hearing things at night, and the mom at first just kept saying, oh, it's the pipes in the wall, whatever, it's pipes. And then they start calling this figure that they are seeing,
the
Pipes, who is this guy.
Yeah, like a person, basically.
Yeah, and like even little moments like that are really creepy, and again the way that is sort of just interspersed throughout the more sort of like mundane broadcast elements, and you're sitting there just slowly, gradually being like, something's not right, guys, and they eventually, of course, this turns to some really dark places.
Yeah, like one aspect I liked about, I guess it's kind of relating to the crimes he did against children, is when every time he possesses the girl or eventually possesses the host, he's just reciting nursery rhymes in this like devilish, satanic, demonic voice. So it's just, it's simple, but it's something that's kind of creepy, just taking something very innocent and making it demonic in some way. I like that aspect of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I really like that the one reporter, Sarah, she says at one point something that perfectly describes the feeling of this movie, which is that like nothing really extreme has happened yet. There's been kind of like small details interspersed, and again, there are moments where you can catch that Pipes is in the background of certain things that you can see. So like we're kind of clued in that things are getting a little bit darker, but again, it hasn't affected the broadcast yet. And there's a great moment where Sarah goes into
Pipes in the background.
You might miss it too, exactly. But there's a great moment where she said, "It's sort of eerie just waiting, isn't it?"
That is like the whole thesis of the film in a way.
And it perfectly describes the feeling of watching this film, where you're just sitting here, you're just waiting, you're watching this boring broadcast, and you're being like, things are gonna happen. And and again, the slow accumulation of detail when they're like, he's going around and talking to the locals, and he's just like, man, I hate Halloween. Little kids like dressed up like the devil, like this is stupid. Like, that's what he's saying. Meanwhile, like the women he's interviewing are being like, yeah, there was a girl that went missing like a week ago. Yeah, we still haven't found her. There was like a 5-year-old who was knifed
found a
not
dog
too long
with its
ago.
Guts hanging out, just normal happenings, neighborhood happenings.
And he's like, yeah, that was weird. Anyway, we're going to talk to this spiritualist now and see what his opinion is.
Oh, I know.
But for Esther, for you, in comparison to like, because I know that you've watched a lot of found footage, is there anything that this movie is doing like specifically that's like different that you haven't seen replicated that maybe other people should be replicating?
I mean, a lot of it is the news broadcast aesthetic, obviously, because so much found footage is obviously by its nature meant to be imitating unprofessional, like, productions, consumer grade technology and stuff like that. It's very rare to see a found footage movie that is imitating a very like high level production, and that's usually because when they do, like it's just sucks because it doesn't look like, I don't know if you saw the most recent Paranormal Activity movie from last year, a series I
did not.
The first 3 movies of that series are amazing. They're all so good. And this one is terrible because the cameras just look like fucking whatever, like 8K red, whatever. And it's you're just supposed to be like people. You're just supposed to be like 20-year-olds.
Not this like expensive drone footage.
Exactly. There's literally drone footage in the movie. It's crazy.
Called it.
It's so stupid. And I think what Ghostwatch does really well is like it imitates a professional level of production and broadcast, but in a way that is so like aesthetically specific that it lands. Like it's not like a found footage movie that just looks like a movie is probably going to suck because it's not going to sell itself as found, basically. But a found footage movie that looks like a very specific kind of medium to high scale production is going to be a lot more interesting. And that's what this film does really well.
Yeah, there's moments, just speaking on that live setting again, where things are starting to happen, and you can see like a couple people in the studio getting a little worried. Specifically, the guy that's hosting like the phones. There's
the phone line guy. I love the phone line guy.
There's one moment where
he's always like, "We're getting calls in, Mike."
Like crazy. Yeah, he's so stressed out. And there's one part where it's after they actually experience some type of ghostly phenomenon, and they cut to him, and before he reacts, he's just kind of like staring off into space as if he's contemplating his entire life. And then he kind of clues in and he's like, oh yeah, we've got a caller. And that was just another interesting aspect to use like a well-known host and have him even start to like believe live on television and that kind of thing. So yeah, the format is huge, a huge thing.
Yeah. It can't be overstated, honestly, like how well the imitation is being done. Like there are so many moments that only work because of that. Like one of my personal favorites is something that could have only been done using this format, which is when they start to hear the noises in the house. And they start trying to locate them and find out what's happening, because they've obviously set up these cameras to actually spot something that the people can't, which is something that we actually talked about with Esther on Blair Witch Project. That's what's supposed to be scary about found footage, that the camera can see things that the characters can't. That's the whole reason they take the cameras. And this one does it really well, where they have all of those sort of cameras set up around the house to, figure out where to centralize this noise. And there's a moment where they actually let you in on the experience as the audience, watching the characters live edit the film for you, where you can get the doctor literally saying, show me the top of the stairs, show me the bedroom, show me the kitchen, and the sort of live broadcasters and the guys in the switch room are actually doing that. And obviously it's not a live broadcast, so that's not happening. It's a deliberate choice they have to make in the filmmaking to pull this off. But it's really cool, because that's actually the moment where they discovered that it is the one girl, Susie, the older sister, doing the banging. And then you can see like the smirk on that anchor man's face when he's like, this was a hoax the whole fucking time. We fucking got him live on air. Like, because you could tell that was his opinion of the material that he was doing.
And he's ready
but
to
the way
wrap
that
it up too.
Yeah, and he's like, I think we've been shown that this is a deliberate fraud, And the little girl, oh my God, some of the performances in this I think are really good. But that little girl, when she's just like, I just wanted to show them, we gave you what you wanted. Yeah, being like, some of the interesting, all of you were waiting for it.
Yeah, because a lot of the subtext of this movie is about like poverty and class, and the notion that like. Something that also interestingly comes across in the Conjuring 2 like adaptation of this same story, this notion that like it was assumed the Enfield poltergeist was, just a hoax because the family was poor, and people sort of derided them as like, well, they're just trying to sell a story, they're just trying to make a buck.
Right.
And that's part of this version of the story. It's part of Ghostwatch, especially in that bit where the girl says, we gave you what you wanted. The idea that like, obviously in the narrative, this is a real thing that's happening, but like what is stressing her out as the thing goes on is that because nothing is happening, she's worried that not that they're going to think they're lying, but like that they're not going to get anything out of this, that nothing is going to get fixed, that nobody's going to help them. Yeah. And it's like, it's sad, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really sad moment. And I think also leads into a really interesting element of this film that, they can't do in something like The Conjuring 2, where they're just like sort of adapting this story. Like it's something that's literally affecting these characters that, maybe they are seeking this attention. Some people think for cynical reasons, they're doing it because they hope to actually relieve this issue that they're having. But this film in particular, it also kind of implicates the viewer in a way where it's kind of like suggesting that this broadcast exists for a general live entertainment. Like they have a phone line set up.
This isn't about your help. This is about our entertainment.
Exactly.
And there's even a kind of really, really cool little twist that they throw near the end where the doctor kind of realizes that, through this, sort of this entertainment model and through this modern technology, they've kind of performed a new form of seance.
Yeah, a national seance.
Which is actually, which is actually kind of summoned it and actually made it worse. And all of these characters sort of building up this fear together and building up this, by sharing these stories, they've kind of created this national network of sitting around a campfire together and performing a kind of ritual. And I thought that was like a really interesting element to it. And I was I went and did some reading up on the film, and I found out that Adam Curtis, actually, the renowned British documentary, actually wrote about this film, I think in the 2000s. And on his blog, he said he pointed out something, you know, really similar to this idea that I thought was awesome, where he basically said that this film sort of captured an idea of ghosts are now inside the television itself.
Yeah.
That there is this strange netherworld of PR-driven half-truths and synthetic personalities and waves of just like apocalyptic fear that the public is feeling, all kind of funneling together. And I feel like that kind of perfectly captures what it feels like to by the end of this film, you are watching something that is
shot.
That the last stuff that happens in this film, like it genuinely does feel like, again, it's something that's constructed, but it's something that's completely like unleashed and untamed.
Yeah.
Like Curtis using this term sort of like synthetic apocalypse is like exactly what that, you know, ends up feeling like when it gets to the finale. And obviously things start going crazy. They start finding, you know, like they start using the infrared camera to try and track the ghost and try to help the little girls. And Jamie already mentioned the part where the ghost actually like plays back older footage for them for a while. So there's actually a point in the film
editing now.
Yeah, where the ghost is editing and they're sitting there going, yeah, look, they look fine. I mean, the last time we saw them, they were cut up and screaming
Totally
and freaking
distraught.
the fuck out.
Yeah.
But now they're just sitting there in the living room. They look good. And then the doctor at one point goes, but that picture fell off the wall earlier and shattered. Like, how is it still up there? And then they realize, oh my God, we're not watching live.
It's like 6 hours ago.
Yeah, we're not watching live footage. And yeah, the fucking, I love the tracking shot of Sarah, the live reporter who's there, like running up and down the stairs, like looking for Susie, and eventually ending up at the cupboard under the stairs, which I'm going to assume that this is just a British thing, but it is very funny that they call it a glory hole.
Yeah, dude. That is not the same thing here.
And it is very funny that despite the fact that they go, oh my God, it's coming from the glory hole, and they say it like twice in the film, that the filmmaking is so good that it doesn't take you out of that moment, like even where, you know, she actually like goes into the cupboard and she's trying to get the little girl out and she just gets like pulled in, or when she opens it earlier and you see half of the door frame is taken up by just like this like dead dude who's standing there like by pipes.
Yeah.
And then they don't see it though, because like I think the lighting setup falls over and it like knocks the boom guy over, and they go, oh my God, like we need to help him out. Like,
yeah. Yeah, there's even I like the speaking of the little
panic.
girl and the cellar door. Like I also like the thought where she just goes down the stairs and is explaining everything to everybody at the beginning, and she's just like, "Oh yeah, I was just looking through the crack and I saw a man inside there." Like it's just
he was like bleeding out of his eye.
Yeah, and she's innocently reciting this story. It's definitely got a creepy factor to that too. I liked.
Yeah, definitely like the slow build of the detail and the creepiness factor, and then eventually it unleashes in just like full on like panic and possession. And we do. I found the part in the notes. We do end up finding out that the spirit is a psychologically disturbed molester named Raymond Tunstall, who thinks that he is possessed by a mother Seddons, who was a baby farmer turned child killer from the 19th century.
Of course.
And he hanged himself by tying a wire to a lathe and putting it around his neck. And he was in there for 12 days before they found him being eaten by his own cats. So really gruesome detail throughout this. Again, like the dog being mutilated. Like, I mean, this is what I think really ended up disturbing people, is that like it appeared like a general audience friendly program. And even though it's not the most like graphic in terms of what you see, there are a couple freaky moments, obviously, that we've already talked about with pipes. But then also the subject matter just gets really gruesome after a while. Like, again, describing all the puppy fetuses littered around the community that someone pulled out. And like, yeah, that kind of stuff is that is what I think ended up sitting in with people's mind and what really would have disturbed children watching this.
And also just the fact that the most of the ghostly stuff is happening to kids too, an 11-year-old and I think a 13-year-old girl. So it's,
that's true.
It's that innocence and real lack of defense that they would have as children that makes it a little bit scarier as well. So I can imagine you being a 12-year-old watching this and seeing, the 12-year-old recite some nursery rhyme as the devil and being like, holy shit. Something's happening.
Well, yeah, and then you add on the fact that they're like all of the screens in the studio, like the fact that they're watching that footage on a bunch of screens like behind them, and sometimes we're seeing the shot like framed, and it'd be just an old British guy being like, "Oh," while you're watching that footage.
Yeah, can you imagine also being like we were talking about just coming in like 30 minutes in, and you might think that this is actually a live event that's happening at least within like 15-minute time frame, but can you imagine almost missing all of it, and the only thing you see is Michael Parkinson slowly walk up to the camera as a demonic voice and reciting fee fi fo fum as it goes to black? Like that probably would have been something at least for 5 seconds where you went, is the world ending? Like, what's happening right now?
Yeah, that climax honestly is so good. The way that it goes from like Susie being like, he's hurting me like in the cupboard, and then you watch the reporter get sucked into the cupboard and it slam. Oof. And the wind starts blowing through the house and everything like that, and which then the wind starts blowing through the studio, like literally physically connecting these two places.
Yeah.
And I love the crew just being like, nope, I'm out, I'm done. Literally like the camera guy, the lighting guy. They're just like, I've seen enough. I believe in ghosts now.
I'm good. That's all you needed.
Yep.
Oh, man.
I completely understand as like the lights are slowly going out. And my favorite detail about this is that Parkinson doesn't break his fucking anchor character.
Yeah.
And he's literally just like describing the things happening around him. He's like, well, the lights are losing power now as well. The studio is just
people
it's completely dark now.
Around me.
It is just blackness.
Like a situation.
The lights have failed. There's cameras, but I don't know that anyone's working them.
Oh my God.
There's no cameramen.
If you can hear me, I am deeply frightened.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's great. It's good stuff. I love
that
the
stuff
way
is
they
really
play
fantastic.
with the format and the hosts and the live, like just kind of pulling this whole like live broadcast off too. It's just a very specific format that's not even necessarily the same as like a Ghost Hunters thing or anything like that. So there's a lot of creativity involved in this, really.
Absolutely. Well, I think pivoting towards reductive rating round on Ghostwatch here, I think this one's going to get the high from me, like just right off the bat. I kind of want to watch it again already. I already told my girlfriend that I think she would really like it, so I think we might watch it again sometime this year. Maybe we'll save it for the spooky season, but this I thought was really just fantastic. Like, again, a really clever and creepy sort of like fake reality TV documentary that is so aesthetically indistinguishable from the kind of boring, dry British broadcasting news program that you would watch, that this actually did trick people and viewers of the BBC into thinking that they were watching this for real live on Halloween night 1992. And I just wish I was in that audience. That would have been one hell of an experience. And then how well they sort of like pile up the weirdness and the ghost story aspects and the found footage horror kind of flexing, like, again, sort of like the soundscape and some of the framing and the gruesome stories from the locals and the history and everything like that. And, once again, as it piles up, the seams just kind of start to rip on the broadcast. Like, the style and the camera becomes a little bit more panicked, and you just hear a nonstop soundscape of like screaming kids and terrified reporters running. And, you hear, that there's like a disturbed ghost of a molester who killed himself trying to attack children. Like, it gets really dark, and all the instances where you can see pipes are horrifying if you can spot them. It's that Where's Waldo?
I'm looking up that
style
video.
Horror that a lot of people kind of associate with like Mike Flanagan right now.
Sure.
that kind of stuff is really effective. And yeah, so like not just one of the great pieces of like prank art, since as Jamie mentioned, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, or also, you know, that silent era train that got some people.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it was intended, but it got people.
I was gonna mention too the that famous like alien autopsy that from Area 51. That was a big one.
Yeah,
absolutely in the same lineage.
Yeah, I was obsessed with that when I was a kid, so that's pretty funny. And then there's one I was just looking at on Wikipedia. I hadn't seen this, but I kind of want to check it out. But there's one called Mermaids, The Body Found, and apparently it actually tricked people into thinking they were watching a documentary about mermaids. So that's probably pretty wild too.
There's a really amazing one that I want to watch that my girlfriend has told me about. She remembers seeing commercials for, called When Cars Attack. And this one is, I think, a little more tongue-in-cheek. I don't think it was necessarily intended to fool people, but the premise is that it's real footage of cars that have minds of their own and like are attacking people. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Incredible. But yeah, but I also just don't want to, I guess, for anyone who hasn't seen it, like just say that this is kind of like a gimmick movie, because it's a really terrifying piece of just horror filmmaking as well.
Yeah.
Really thought through. Tracking shots and cutting, and again the slow buildup of sort of like the eerie detail and everything like that, and it's just made all the more shocking by how perfectly it replicates the mundane sort of like form and energy of the medium that it's imitating. It really lulls you into the British broadcasting style, which sounds like a funny thing to compliment a movie for doing, but it's really, really well done. Just watching like, you know, like having the boring doctors do a debate or fielding phone calls from the audience, some of them doing prank calls. Like the one, we didn't mention the one guy who does a prank call where he's like, yeah, my pizza fell on the floor.
And you can hear all his friends laughing in the background.
Yeah. It really just is indistinguishable from what a real broadcast about the paranormal would be, right down to how boring and silly it can be sometimes. But doing that very, very intentionally to create this kind of distance between you and it before suddenly removing that distance from you in the last minute. Like I was really impressed by just how it constantly escalates, literally until the final frame of the film, where you could argue it probably hits its high point, where it chooses to just cut to black right then and there. But also the way that it just intentionally preys on and kind of perversely engages you, as Esther mentioned, the way that it teaches you how to look through the screen, the way to kind of spot what's different from a usual broadcast, the actual scary detail that's popping up, and making you kind of think you're at a safer distance than you are, which is something I think true about just the news in general. The fact that so many people consume news, and what is it, it bleeds, it leads, that kind of thing. You know, the fact that people consume this kind of stuff for entertainment, thinking that, you know, it can't get into their home. This movie is the argument. It absolutely can get into your home. You are part of a televised seance summoning the demon. Your children have PTSD now. Good luck.
Yeah, and now that very same broadcaster you normally trust for your news and whatever is reciting something to you,
demonically reciting,
and trying to possess an
nursery
entire
rhymes.
Nation. Yeah, so it's like unreal. And I really think that this movie makes you feel like it establishes that distance just to make you feel unsafe by the end. That's the whole point of it. Yeah, exactly. And I like that it's not this like, you know, jump scare or something that ends the film. It's this just very slow and creepy Michael Parkinson reciting this demonic nursery rhyme. It's great. So
very high 4 for me, I think, honestly.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. I love the play on the live format. I love that, you know, for the most part, you're just watching a bunch of dry and you know, kind of funny, but very dry BBC hosts that are trying their best to balance the format itself and kind of the feelings of the family that they're dealing with. Some are doing it much better than others. I just thought that this was absolutely brilliant. I love that it ended up being something similar to the War of the Worlds situation, where people were actually falling for this kind of prank. I think that's just awesome. And it, you know,
1 million phone calls they estimate that they received during its 90-minute broadcast.
That's crazy.
Could you imagine?
And it's just a testament to the skill here. Like it's obviously that well directed if enough people were convinced of the
it got under people's skin
of England.
for sure.
Yeah. So just awesome. Check it out. It's one of my favorite ghost movies now, and I just checked it out for the first time, I think Halloween last year. So this is a new one for me.
Great time to watch it.
Yeah, it's spectacular. Go check it out.
For you, Esther.
Oh yeah, I mean it's like it's a 5.
Nice.
It is a non-traditional kind of found footage movie like we talked about, but it has everything that I love about the genre and more. It's so well executed and smart and scary. Yeah, it's so good.
Hell yeah. Oh yeah, and there was one line I have written down that I wanted to hit before we wrapped up. The little girl says it. It's incredible, and it leads into the whole the way that it's using sort of like implicating the viewer and the camera and everything like that as well. But when she says, when they start trying to shut down the production a little bit at one point, because they were like, the girl's getting hurt, she probably scratched herself, like we should just stop this now, this isn't fun anymore.
Right.
Like we were having fun poking fun at this family, but now it's just kind of sad. That's the point of the movie that they hit.
Yeah.
And the one little girl, as they're trying to end the program, says, but Pipe says he wants to see everybody. Look, everybody wants to see him. And she's like pointing at the camera crew.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So good and so scary. But yeah, I think that'll wrap it up for our ghostly double feature here of the Discarnates from 1998 and Ghostwatch from 1992. Thanks so much, Esther, for bringing these films with you. This was a really great double feature. This is the part of the show where if you've got anything to plug while you're here, feel free to do so.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, you have to Google Get Cynical Podcast to find my podcast, Get Cynical, because we don't have a website. Just Google it and you'll get there. We talk about internet video creators who are bad people. In our first season, we did That Guy with the Glasses and chronicled that history. And this season, our current season, we're talking about YouTube creators who sort of had aspirations to make features and all of their terrible movies. And we've had a lot of, we had Josh on the podcast.
Yeah.
We had Perry Rowland. We had
Nice.
Yeah.
Cameron.
Friend of the pod.
Nibiru Truth, another friend of the pod.
Also friend of the pod.
And we had Felix Biederman, who I don't know if he's been on Sleazoids, but I know you've had other
He has
shadow
not.
guys. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, you have to Google that. And then you have to go to my Twitter account, which is Capybaroness, which is CAPYBARONESS. And if you look at my pinned tweet, if you enjoyed our conversation about the Discarnates, just take a look at my pinned tweet. I
can recommend taking a look at the pinned tweet. We may have used the pinned tweet. Check out the pinned tweet.
And would you and before people get into the podcast, would you suggest that every person watches every single Channel Awesome video?
No, we as to paraphrase the Nostalgia Critic, we did it so you don't have to.
Well said.
I had to, though. You made me do it.
I might strap in one day. Get that samurai blade out.
His review of AI was brutal. I never want to hear that man talk about Steven Spielberg ever again.
I forgot that's
Pink
what we had
Floyd.
you on for. God.
Yeah.
Oh, The Wall. I've seen that one. Anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, can definitely recommend checking out all of those things. Go see what Esther's doing. She's great. In 1 week's time, for our listeners, we are going to be back over on the Patreon feed where there looks like there's going to be a new, hopefully not shitty, but I don't have super high hopes, Texas Chainsaw reboot sequel, legacy sequel. I don't know who. It looks like they're Halloween 2018ing Texas Chainsaw now. We'll see how that plays out for them
in the trailer, so I don't know, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But it made a really great excuse for us to go back, as Jamie mentioned at the top of the show, and talk about the Texas Chainsaw movies that nobody talks about.
Yeah,
which are the two from the 90s. We're going to talk about Texas Chainsaw 3. And Texas Chainsaw 4, which I believe is called The Next Generation. Is that right? Yeah, I think. Yeah.
They bring it. They bring it to the next generation. Absolutely.
So we've already talked about Texas Chainsaw 1 and 2. You can find episodes on those previously. We obviously love those films, so we are very curious to see what they were trying to pull off in the 90s. No idea if they're going to be good or not, but I am...
I like the fourth one, but the third one is something else, yeah.
Morbidly curious. Anyway, I am curious to see McConaughey get his McConaughey thing on in the Texas Chainsaw movie.
It goes wild. It's so fun.
And then in 2 weeks' time, we are going to be back with a special guest where we are going to be going Schwarzenegger and Seagal mode. We're going to be finally talking about one that we've been kind of saving for a while. A guest finally wanted to bring it on. We're going to talk about one Commando, Mark L. Lester. Somehow we've covered all of his other films before this. We've covered like Class of 1984, and I can't remember what that other one was. But we're going to talk about Commando, and then we're going to be talking about Steven Seagal's Under Siege is the pairing. And
the testosterone is off the charts.
It's one of the few Seagals I actually haven't seen yet, so I am curious how that one is going to play out. But that's what you can expect in 2 weeks' time. But yeah, I think that wraps it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.